Right, I was looking for a simple way to record the output of my thermal imaging camera. So what I was after was a box that would record composite video onto an SD card. First thing I saw was this. This is designed for closed circuit TV applications. Ordered this is about a little bit over 20 quid from the UK, but realised it fairly soon after I'd sort of clicked buy it now that the problem is it hasn't really got any user interface, so it probably wouldn't be all that flexible. So I did a bit more searching around. I've not really looked at that. I'll have a play with that at some point, but found this. This is actually a little pocket recorder. It's designed for like covert surveillance type applications. A little bit over 50 quid from China. Took about a week to arrive. Angel Eye. Keep the eye on what you care. So let's have a look what comes in the box. This isn't a proper unboxing, I've taken all this apart before, so you haven't got quite as many polythene bags. The usual user guide in Chinese and also Chinglish. But the Chinglish is good enough that you can actually figure out the obscure little things that aren't totally obvious, so that's not too bad. So it's designed as a covert recorder, so you get this little camera. It's got a pinhole lens, but it's got actually a standard 12mm M12 by 0.5 thread, so you can actually use standard M12 sort of webcam type lenses. This lens has actually got a metal body. This sort of just a plastic casing. It's a bit loose. You probably want to put something in there just to tighten it up because it's actually quite sloppy. And that's got a 2.5mm 4-way plug on it. That sort of powers audio and video. And because it's designed as a sort of a body-worn thing, you get these sort of fake buttons. So the idea is that you sort of put screw these buttons on the front, so it looks like just a button with a tiny little hole in the middle. What I really like is, obviously, you know, it would look a bit silly if you walked around with just a single button, so they actually give you a bag of matching buttons so you can sew these onto your clothes so they match, which I think is brilliant. I know, okay, they look like cheap tacky buttons, but the fact that they give you these fake ones I think is wonderful. Little remote. This is actually turns out, it doesn't actually say anywhere in the documentation, but it turns out this is actually a 315 meg, so technically not strictly legal in Europe. So this so you can remotely start and stop recording. This feels quite nice, a sort of metal centre and a little covered up button. That sort of seems quite nicely made. Set of earphones. USB cable. What I don't like is it uses a non-standard connector. This is not a micro. It's about the height of a micro, but it's narrower. If you actually look on the side of the recorder, I mean, it is pretty packed, so they probably may well just didn't have space. But I just don't like non-standard USB cables because it means you've got to keep the cable for that unit rather than picking any random one you might happen to have. This is the actual recorder. Which we'll go into in detail in a minute. Power charger. Yeah. Cheap Chinese chargers, very, very lightweight. We'll have to have a look inside that to see what it looks like. I don't think it will be good. And this is just a standard AV lead. This can be used either for video in or out. There's in and out connectors on here. The in has power out, so you get 5 volts on this phono. I don't know whether it's current limited, so you need to be perhaps a little bit careful of that. Let's take a quick look on the outside. Everything's on this one side, which is probably quite handy if you've got it sat in a pocket. You've got AV in and out. These are on 4-pole 2.5mm mini jacks. You can get these cables quite easily. They're fairly standard AV cables. One LED for USB power, and the other one is lights up blue when it's recording. You've got this non-standard USB connector, which is a bit annoying, but you can see this is a fairly packed thing, so maybe they just didn't have a space for anything else. And there's this slide switch, it's marked Q and N, which I assume is quick and normal, and you can configure this so literally you just flick it on to start recording, flick it off to stop. So it's a really nice simple user interface. That's quite a nice little feature, and you can program whether you want that to record audio or video. And you can also use it to turn on and off motion detection. On the top you just got this button. This is power and a single button to take a single shot. Micro SD card. For some reason the Chinese seem to call these TF cards, maybe tiny flash or something, I don't know. There's an internal speaker. There's space for an internal microphone, but that's not fitted, so you have to have an external microphone for recording. And the battery comes out here. This is a 1.8 amp hour lithium poly, and I noticed on there actually says 3310, 3410, and I looked up and this actually is the same as a Nokia phone battery, so These are obviously very readily available, so it's nice that, you know, a fairly obscure piece of kit, you're not stuck with some weird wacko battery that's hard to get hold of. You can pick these up anywhere, so that's quite a nice feature. And the Evergreen, it's got quite a nice feel. It's got this sort of matte, it's not quite rubbery, but it's quite a slightly soft feel plastic. It's got quite a nice sort of quality to it. And for a covert thing, you might want something that's perhaps a little bit thinner, even if it was at the expense of being bigger. But it's still quite a cute, nice little unit, I think. The buttons are fairly nice, clicky buttons. Well, I'll just get this power supply out of the way. As I've said before, anything that comes from China that plugs into the mains, you really have to look inside it, because there's so much unsafe junk out there. I did actually fire it up, and it does seem to get quite hot, you know, hotter than I'd like, just charging the battery. Well, as expected, this power supply is actually pretty horrific. The first obvious issue is that you've got these fairly spindly thin wires with mains on them, and the wires going up to the charge connection all sort of touching each other, and there's no segregation at all on there. Looking at the PCB, it's this brown all paper type material, so it hasn't got very good heat resistance. There's no input filtering at all. It's a half-wave rectifier on the front, so that's going to be fairly inefficient. You've got this sort of, I'm assuming they're using this resistor as a sort of fuse right next to this electrolytic, so if that gets warm it's going to cook that capacitor. There's components that are sort of half off the board, whether that's for cooling or just to jump over other parts, I don't know. This transistor is just sort of up in the air. You know, the whole build quality is just very shoddy. There's just bits sort of splayed all over the place. Looks like it probably has been flow soldered. The clearance is pretty abysmal. I mean, this is the clearance between the primary and the secondary, and that's maybe 4mm at a pinch, which is just not good enough. And the lithium-ion charger, I mean, there just seems to be, sort of, as far as I can tell, about just 2 transistors handling the charge regulation, so that's clearly nothing like a proper lithium-ion charger. It's just pretty horrendous. I mean, the only thing to do with this is throw it in the bin. Fortunately, this unit will charge quite happily off USB, so, you know, if you get one of these, I'm absolutely serious, just throw the charger in the bin. Don't even think about using it. It's just not safe. Right, let's take a look at the actual camera. You need to hold the button for about 3 seconds to turn it on, which I think is a little on the long side. Yeah, it's nice that it won't turn on for an accidental press, but 3 seconds is a little bit excessive. It's sort of fairly wide angle, sort of pinhole lens. Considering the size of the lens, it's fairly brightly lit. Now it obviously gets quite noisy in low lighting, but considering the size and cost, it's fairly reasonable for what it's for. There's quite a few menu functions on this. Hit escape. There's like 4 basic modes: video record, audio record, playback, and just some setups. The menu system's nice and responsive. There's no lag at all. That's quite nice. The storage select, there is actually about 100 megs of internal memory, so you can actually use this without the SD card. That gives you about 5 minutes of VGA resolution, 30 frames a second. So it's fairly short for video, but for audio it would give you a fairly reasonable amount of time. It does seem to be fairly intelligent in that when you put an SD card in, it switches to SD. When you take it out, it switches into internal, so that seems to be reasonably sensible. Storage info just tells you how much you've got available. That just allows you to format a card and erase the internal memory. Real-time clock setting, display. That just basically seems to let you select between PAL and NTSC output on the TV. Not quite sure whether these are alternatives or as well as the LCD. Don't know whether you can get it into. Let's try that. You know, I suspect it only lets you switches the LCD off when you actually plug an external monitor in. I haven't really experimented with that because obviously you don't want to be in a situation where you've turned off the LCD and then can't see what's happening on the screen, but I've not seen it do that. Screen brightness, it is really bright. This display at full brightness is really bright. One minor point though is you can actually set it so low that it's actually off, so you end up not actually being able to see the menu to set it back again unless you use some really bright illumination. So that's a little bit of an annoyance, but again, that's just, don't do it. It's not a big deal. Language, it seems to support 2 flavours of Chinese plus Russian on the user interface. The menu system, there's actually another menu within each. When you actually enter record mode, there's a whole load of other settings. So this is now in record mode, it's showing live images from the camera. And then you've got a second menu here that gives you resolution. It goes 800, 600, 640 by 480, 320 by 240, so obviously that's going to give you a trade-off between quality and recording time. I'm not sure what the resolution of that camera actually is, whether it's VGA or 800 by 600. Switch setting, this lets you determine what that slide switch does on the side, so there's a few different modes: video record, audio record, so it's sort of quite flexible, so you can just set it up to literally switch on to start recording. This is the recording time, 5, 15 and 30 minutes, which I don't quite understand why there's that. Yeah, I can understand why there's a mode to say make it record for 5 minutes then stop, but what I don't understand is why there isn't a, you know, until it fills up sort of mode. Right, after a bit of testing I figured out what this is about. Basically this is the time after which it creates a new file. So if you select 5 minutes, leave it on recording, it will create a new file every 5 minutes. So each file you get will be 5 minutes long. So that's all that's about. It's nothing. It's not an overall limit or anything. It's purely the trade-off between file size and number of files. Vibrating. This has actually got a vibrator in it, which is actually quite a vicious vibrator. But it will tell you like when it turns on, when it turns off. It gives you different vibrate patterns. It'll also tell you, for example, if the memory fills up, it'll start vibrating. So here we go, it's vibrating. It's actually pretty. You'd struggle not to feel that, but I think it's so strong that if you're trying to do it covertly, it's quite audible. So I think that partly defeats the point of a covert recorder. But yeah, the option's there, but obviously you can turn it off. One thing is menu, it's a little bit confusing. It's not actually, if you've got a two option menu, it's not really clear which is the selected one, so it's just a slightly poor user interface design. Well, you know, is yellow or orange the selected one? When you've only got two, it's obvious if you've got more than two, but that's just a bit of silliness. Frames per second, you've got 10, 20, 30 frames a second, again to trade off quality versus record time. Remote control, again that just determines what the remote control does. You either have it off, tell it to start and stop record video and audio. One reason you'd want it off is that the RF receiver will be drawing a certain amount of current. I'll measure what it's actually drawing later, but if it's on, sitting there waiting to record, it will be drawing a certain amount of current when it's switched off waiting to record. Standby, I think this just means it will go into standby if it's sat around doing nothing for a while. A couple of settings there. And overwrite enable, this basically says when the thing fills up, will it stop or will it start overwriting the oldest files. And so if you go into playback mode, you've got the choice of playing back the various types of content. Right, in playback mode, this is a blank card, so there's nothing on it. If I just flip that, eject that, it's fairly intelligent, so this is a file that's in the internal memory. If I stick another card in, it seems to handle card changes quite nicely. I'm quite happy with that, and it just gives you a list of the files that are on there. So just play those back, just various messaging on. It does seem to like playing back sort of each file in sequence if you don't do anything. There's no way of fast forwarding through a file though. These buttons, all they do is adjust the volume. So if you've got a lot of files, it'll be a lot quicker just to hook it up to the PC to review it. There's no real way to just skim through files on the built-in thing. When you're in this record mode, you can just literally hit record and it'll start recording. You can also press this top button, it'll just take a single photo, sort of single still image. Right, let's take a look inside. Comes apart quite easily. That's just the front cover of the display flex. Right, it's quite a nice little single PCB, quite nicely laid out. Decent build quality in here. Parts sort of quite heavily populated on both sides. There's this little subboard here. This is the RF receiver. One of these pathetic number scrub off jobs. I'm guessing this is probably a module they buy in and then just stick on as a ready-made modules. You see the vibration motor here. Right, let's try out my new camcorder macro lens to see how do some close-ups on this. Right, the heart of it is this big Zoran chip. This is a basically a camera on a chip this company makes quite a lot of devices specifically targeted at camera applications, so they integrate obviously a standard processor for user interface, but things like LCD control, the camera interface to the camera itself, and all the hardware encode decode for the various video formats and audio formats. Crystal down there, 12 meg crystal, providing the main time base. Over here, this is the audio amplifier to drive the speaker. There's this little sort of fairly tiny little speaker. There's a few components omitted here. I'm guessing that's a microphone amplifier because there's a hole in the case next to it, which I'm guessing was for an internal microphone that wasn't fitted, so I'd imagine that's probably a microphone amplifier they've not fitted. A few odd bits and pieces here. These are probably input coupling caps for the video in and out, I'd guess. This is probably just power supply stuff over here. There's an inductor here, so this will probably be power management. I'm guessing because of the position that maybe that's the backlight driver for the LCD. That's sort of very close to the LCD connector. 4 buttons up here. There's 1 GB Samsung NAND flash on here, so that's going to be the firmware storage, and also the internal memory storage. Over on the other side, this is an SC2272, which appears to be a remote control receiver. So this will be decoding the signal from the RF remote, which for some reason they didn't integrate onto the main chip, maybe because they didn't really have enough access to the software side, or maybe it didn't have the capability for doing the serial decode. I'm not quite sure, but the remote seems to be sort of added on to the primary core functionality. There's a empty chip there again, maybe that's from a different remote option or some other optional build. Quite a few power supply circuits with these inductors here. So that's the RF receiver, and that's the antenna there. More power supply stuff. This is the vibrator motor, it's a standard vibration motor. Battery contacts. This is a Texas front end for the video, so this is composite video front end. Obviously that Zoran chip is probably intended for use with camera chips, so this is just digitizing the incoming PAL NTSC video to a format that it can understand. There's another couple of crystals here. One of these will probably be a real-time clock crystal, and the other one's probably the time base for the video decode. Video in and out sockets, the couple of LEDs. There's one that indicates charging, the other one is an on-off LED. This non-standard USB connector, and this programmable switch. So you can see they're quite tight, so maybe they just didn't really have space for a standard micro USB, but it's a little bit annoying they've used something non-standard. That's the micro SD socket. Space there, I don't know if those are really the programming pads or some other optional components there, but yeah, quite a nice board actually. Very good build quality, nicely laid out, can't really fault that. This is inside the remote. It's quite nicely made. It's a big sort of heavy metal frame in the middle of it. It's quite unusual to see. This is actually a 12 volt battery. This is actually going to be a stack of little button cells to provide 12 volts. You don't see these very often. Remotes tend to use coin cells these days. 12 volt ones were quite common a few years ago, so I'm a little bit surprised, but I'm guessing they just buy this in as a standard part. The 2 buttons, there's obviously an option there for a second button that's not fitted. That I'm guessing is probably a SAW filter, so it says 315, so I'm guessing that's 315 megahertz, and there's an encoding chip here with a similar part number. That's HS2260, which I'm guessing that'll be the matching part for the decoder that's inside. And this around here, this is going to be probably the antenna, this PCB track here. On the other side there's solder link options to set the ID, device ID for the transmitter. There doesn't seem to be any corresponding option on the receiver, so I don't think there's any way to have multiple receivers operated by multiple remotes on this thing. But again, it's quite a nicely made PCB, little blue LED on it. So the only issue is it's 315. The 315 is the sort of US equivalent to the 433 meg that's common in Europe for things like car alarm remotes. Sort of for historical reasons, there's just been 2 frequencies. The UK that actually used to use 418, but that then got taken over by the Tetra radio system, so 433 is pretty much standardised through UK and Europe, and the corresponding one in the US and I don't know, maybe Far East, I'm not sure, is 315. And this is inside the camera. Obviously a single chip camera device there, a little microphone, Not much else. There'll probably be a voltage regulator. Not sure what that chip is. Could either be a microphone preamp or maybe a clock generator or something. Can't think what else that would be, but nothing particularly exciting. This is like a headphone type cable, so it uses this finely woven wire for maximum flexibility. Right, let's look at the power consumption. This is in its capturing from the camera, displaying it on screen mode. If I just start it recording, it goes up a little bit, about 380 odd milliamps. This is recording to the micro SD card. Stop that. So that's about 340 in this mode, but obviously the camera and everything's running. Just pull the camera out, 160, so we're looking at about 200 odd milliamps for the just for the camera. We just turn this off and put it in its sort of silent recording mode. Right, this is actually in off mode, and it's pulling about 1 milliamp. Now this is going to be the current from the remote receiver. So in 1 milliamp that corresponds to sort of about 900 hours before the battery goes flat. So that's not a major problem. If we just start it recording with the remote, about 320 milliamps. So on the nominal battery capacity is 1800 milliamp hours. So that's sort of something of the order of 5 hours record time, which you should be able to get on a decent size SD card. This does support up to 32 gig SD cards. So battery life looks pretty reasonable. Right, now let's see, in theory we should be able to lose that extra current by turning the remote off. So remote control off. Turn it off again. And it looks like we're actually still drawing that current, so the remote off looks like it's not actually powering that receiver down. It seems to be fairly intelligent in turning the camera power on and off, in that, you know, like in playback mode it turns the camera off, so it's only actually driving the power out to the camera. There's 5 volts out on here when it's recording or in preview mode, but it looks like it's not turning that receiver off. And in fact, I seem to remember to try it. Yeah, I mean, although I've turned the receiver off, it is actually still reacting to the remote and still starting to record, so there seems to be a minor issue there. But other than that, the lifetime seems not too unreasonable. Well, I've just tried disconnecting the power to the RF module, and that in off mode it's now only drawing 420 microamps, so about sort of 2/3 of that draw was the RF module, and the rest, sort of 420 microamps, corresponds to about a 6-month battery shelf life. So not perfect, but not really not much of a big deal. And here it is plugged into the thermal imaging camera. Seems to work quite happily. So I've got a nice sort of quick 1-button record thing. I'll hook up a microphone onto it so I can do some annotations, and it does quite a nice little job, I think. So here's the actual recorded footage. It looks quite reasonable. One thing, the 800x600 will only do 20 frames a second. It'll only do 30 FPS in VGA mode. One annoying thing is though, you can't turn off this time date stamp. I can't see any way of disabling that, which is a little bit annoying. Apart from that, it seems okay. So all in all, I think it's quite a nice piece of kit actually. Throw away the charger, and to be honest, I don't think you really need it, because it will charge quite happily from USB. The USB handling is quite sensible, and you plug a USB in, when it's switched off it will just charge. If you then switch it on, it will enumerate and appear as a hard disk, so you can get access to all the data, and it will still carry on charging in that mode. But also the other thing is, if you take the battery out, it will lose the real-time clock and the settings, so you probably don't actually want to take the battery out to charge it anyway. So just discard the charger. Apart from that, it's, you know, the unit itself is nicely made, the user interface is reasonable, there aren't, you know, the minor quirks there aren't really annoying enough to really complain about. And for 50 odd quid, I really can't see you can complain too much. Probably my only reservation is the fact you can't turn off the on-screen display on the recorded image, and the switch on time's a little bit on the long side. But apart from that, I mean, for what I want to do, it's absolutely perfect. If you need some way of recording composite video onto SD cards, this thing works a treat.